The rain had been falling since dawn, tapping against the high glass walls of the federal building with a steady rhythm that matched the slow crawl of the security line inside. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a pale glare on the tiled floor and the faces of dozens waiting in. Silence. Umbrellas dripped onto the welcome mats. Coats clung to shoulders, heavy and damp. At the far end of the atrium, the entrance checkpoint buzzed with routine efficiency. ID cards slid across counters. Bins clattered on conveyor belts. Security personnel moved briskly, barking instructions that had been repeated 100 times already that, "Morning, take off your shoes, empty your pockets, keep moving." Most complied without question. Near the middle of the line, a woman stood completely still. She looked to be in her late 60s, dressed in a slate gray wool coat and plain black shoes polished with quiet. Her silver hair was pulled back into a neat French twist, and a canvas duffel rested at her feet. She held a small rolling suitcase by the handle, upright and steady. Unlike the people around her, she wasn't scrolling through a phone or shifting from one foot to the other. She stood with both feet square, her spine straight, hands clasped lightly in front of her. Not rigid, but deliberate. Her name, according to the ID clipped inside her bag, was Martha Lane, but no one had asked her for it yet. Across the lobby, Officer Briggs finished scanning the latest traveler and waved them through. With a flick of his wrist, he was 39, built like a high school linebacker who had never quite moved on from his glory days. The seams of his uniform strained slightly around the shoulders, and the corners of his mouth tugged downward in a permanent scowl. He was not having a good morning. His gaze swept the queue, skipping past young professionals in hoodies and sneakers, pausing when it landed on the older woman standing unnaturally still. She didn't glance up or fidget under his gaze. That caught his attention. Briggs nudged the security console with the back of his knuckle, muttering something to the officer beside him. Just enough to mark her. Just enough to begin the process. He didn't know why exactly. Maybe it was boredom. Maybe it was instinct. The woman didn't react as the line shuffled forward in tiny increments. She moved only when the person ahead of her moved, and then precisely the same amount. No sigh. No complaints. No impatience. She kept her eyes ahead, her posture unnervingly calm. Outside, the rain kept falling. Inside, the atrium was warm and dry but tense. The line dragged. A child in a stroller fussed quietly behind her, and someone nearby coughed into their sleeve. A man farther back was complaining to his phone about being late for a meeting, his voice carrying too far. Still, she didn't seem to hear any of it. Briggs checked the time. 09:16. He looked back toward the woman. Something about the set of her shoulders made him uneasy. Not scared, just unsure. Like he'd seen something like it before but couldn't place it. His partner, Meeks, was too busy joking with another traveler to notice. Briggs tilted his chin toward the woman again. She met his eyes this time, briefly. No challenge in her expression. No fear either. Just a flicker of something deeper. Recognition, maybe. Like she was used to being scrutinized. He felt himself frown harder and looked away. No one said anything. The line inched forward again. Martha Lane stepped with it. Her duffel didn't drag. Her rolling bag didn't clatter. She walked like someone who had learned long ago how to move efficiently, without drawing attention, not hiding, just existing in the spaces where no one thought to look. Near the front of the line now, Briggs shifted in place, then nodded once, subtle and firm. She was next. The metal detectors buzzed softly. A brief pause. Then the sound of gloves snapping into place. He didn't know it yet, but this would be the last time he underestimated someone based on how they looked in a security line. The conveyor belt clacked softly as the next set of bins moved forward. At 09:18, Officer Briggs gestured with 2 fingers toward the woman he'd been watching. The gesture looked casual, but it wasn't. His voice was flat. "Ma'am, step over here, please." Martha Lane didn't hesitate. She picked up her duffel and suitcase without a sound, walking toward the secondary screening table with that same quiet efficiency. Her posture didn't change. Neither did her face. Briggs motioned toward the table. "Place your bags here. Remove your coat. Identification, please." Martha handed over a laminated card, slightly worn around the edges. He held it up to the light, glanced at the birth date, the expiration. His brows pulled together. This ID's expired. She reached into the outer pocket of her suitcase and offered a letter with a government seal. "The letter states it remains valid for today's appointment," she said. Her voice was even, unhurried. Briggs barely skimmed the document before setting it down. "What's the purpose of your visit?" "Appointment? With who? That's personal." He looked up from the table, annoyed. Everything about her was too contained, Too deliberate. Most people would have explained, apologized, looked nervous. She didn't. And that unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. Officer Meeks, who had just finished clearing a young man with a laptop and backpack, ambled over. He was older than Briggs, heavier, with a habit of chewing gum that popped when he got tense. He saw the woman, then gave Briggs a look. Everything good. Secondary screen? Briggs muttered. Expired ID. Evasive answers. Meeks shrugged and nodded at Martha. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to open your bags for inspection. Right here, please. Yes, sir. The way she said it stopped Meeks for a half second. Not sarcastic, not submissive, just automatic, as if the phrase lived in her bones. Briggs blinked. Something about that tone sounded familiar, though he couldn't place it. She set the duffel on the table. Her movements were smooth, practiced. She unzipped it partway, then paused. I'd prefer a private screening, if possible. That's not how this works, Meeks said, now flipping on a pair of nitrile gloves. You can make it easier by cooperating fully. Otherwise, we can take this to a holding room and make it more formal. Martha nodded once. Very well. The zipper moved in one clean line. Inside, carefully packed, were a few worn personal effects, a small bottle of prescription medication, a folded scarf, a slim volume of poetry, Tennyson's name barely legible on the spine. Meeks pulled it out and flipped it open. Poetry? Huh, he said, glancing at Briggs. Beside it was a neatly sealed envelope, marked private in handwritten cursive. Briggs held it up. What's this? Martha didn't blink. Personal correspondence. He slid it across the table instead of opening it. Underneath, a black and white photograph lay in a protective sleeve. Meeks picked it up. It showed a group of people standing in front of a UH-1 Huey helicopter. One of the men had a sidearm holstered at his hip. The faces were faded, but a few were clearly in uniform. Military family. No response. Briggs turned the photo toward her. Is this you? Yes. Were you military? I served, she said simply. What branch? That's not relevant to this appointment. Briggs set the photo down harder than necessary. We'll decide what's relevant. He leaned in a little. You understand this kind of behavior only makes things worse for you, right? She didn't flinch. The line of travelers behind the checkpoint had slowed. A few people had noticed the growing tension and turned slightly to watch. Meeks kept pulling items from the bag. A battered leather notebook with initials burned into the cover. A pocket address book. A worn rosary. Nothing illegal. Nothing dangerous. Just strangely deliberate. Briggs began to feel irritated, not because she wasn't cooperating, but because everything about her felt outside his usual pattern. People came through here stressed or annoyed or afraid. They got nervous. They asked questions. They protested. This woman did none of that. He held up the notebook. What's this? There's something handwritten on the first page. Operation Rook, Langley, 1979. He read it aloud, mangling the rhythm. Is this some kind of code? Martha said nothing. Meeks looked closer. That's CIA. Right. Briggs scoffed. Or she copied something off the internet to look impressive. Come on, this smells like attention-seeking. Retired, maybe. Wants to play mysterious. Then why not just say so? Meeks asked quietly. Briggs didn't answer. The sound of rain filtered faintly through the lobby. The lights above buzzed. Behind them, the metal detector gave a dull beep as another person passed through. Briggs looked back at her. She hadn't moved. Still standing straight. Still watching. Still completely unfazed. He crossed his arms. Last chance. Anything you want to declare? No, sir. He wasn't sure why. But that answer felt less like defiance and more like a warning. He didn't. Understand yet? Meeks reached deeper into the duffel, his gloved fingers brushing against a solid object tucked along the side panel. He paused, then pulled out a small metal box, no bigger than a deck of cards. The latch clicked faintly as he opened it. Inside was a single item, centered on dark blue velvet, a round pin, worn but polished. The design was unfamiliar, a star within a triangle, ringed by symbols neither Meeks nor Briggs recognized. No serial number, no unit designation, no branch insignia, just the subtle weight of something that meant more than it revealed. Briggs leaned in. What is that? Martha responded evenly. A commendation. From where? That's not public record. Her tone was cool, not defensive. The words sounded rehearsed, as if they had been said many times before to people who didn't understand the rules they were brushing against. She didn't blink. She didn't offer more. Meeks tilted the pin toward the light. This isn't Army, or if it is, it's not from anything I've seen. There are commendations outside what you'd find on Wikipedia, she said softly. A man 2 spots back in line had begun watching closely. He wasn't filming. Not yet. But his posture had shifted. His coffee cup lowered slightly. Another woman behind him nudged her partner and pointed with her chin. Briggs caught the movement out of the corner of his eye. He didn't like being the center of attention without full control. He tapped the pin with his gloved finger, louder than needed. "Where did you get this?" Martha's gaze held his for just a moment. "From someone who earned it." Then, after a beat, more quietly, "It was passed to me after their death." Meeks set the box on the table. His expression was less cocky now. "There's no name. Nothing marked. It's not meant to be displayed." The atmosphere around them had shifted. The tone, the silence. Even the agents working the adjacent lanes had started glancing over. Briggs straightened up. "Okay, this is getting ridiculous. What exactly are you trying to pull here?" Martha's face remained calm. Her hands rested lightly on the edge of the table. No rings, no watch, just skin that bore the quiet record of time and sun. She wasn't trying to impress them. She wasn't trying anything at all. "I'm not pulling anything." "You asked?" I answered. "You're being evasive," Briggs said. "Or you're asking the wrong questions," she replied. For a second, no one spoke. The box sat between them, metal cool under the fluorescent lights. The crowd wasn't large, not yet, but the mood had shifted. People were leaning in, curious, waiting. Meeks cleared his throat. "You said it was a commendation." "Military." Martha nodded once. "Which branch?" "That information is not available for disclosure." Briggs made a short, forced laugh. "That's not how this works, ma'am. You can't just say things are classified and expect us to go along." "Then don't go along," she said. Her voice wasn't raised. It didn't need to be. It had the kind of control that came from long practice. The kind learned not in boardrooms or classrooms, but somewhere quieter, with higher stakes. Meeks looked at the pin again. The edges were smooth from wear. The symbols weren't decorative. They had meaning. He just didn't know what. "Is it valuable?" he asked. "Not in money." "What then?" "It belonged to people who understood what silence costs." That stopped him. He didn't know what she meant. Not exactly, but it felt like truth. Briggs crossed his arms. "Let's keep going." The box stayed on the table. For now, Meeks reached back into the bag, slower now. The next item he pulled out was a plastic sleeve containing a second photograph, black and white, older. A group of people, maybe 12, stood in front of a UH-1 Huey. Its rotors still. The background suggested a temporary landing zone. Tense. Mud. Someone had written on the back in faded ink Langley, "Operation Rook, 1979. He flipped it over and showed it to Briggs. One figure in the photo looked like Martha. The haircut was shorter, uniform barely visible. Everyone in the photo wore gear. Not ceremonial. Real. Briggs squinted. "Operation Ruck." He'd misread the name. He said it like a joke. A few people nearby turned their heads. The woman with the coffee cup leaned in closer. The man who had been checking his phone lowered it to his side. Martha didn't respond. She kept her hands where they were, on the edge of the table. Calm. Meeks raised his eyebrows. "I've never heard of Operation Rook." "It wasn't in the papers," she said. "What kind of operation?" "That depends on who's asking." He held up the photo again. "So these are all... what soldiers?" "They were..." Briggs folded his arms, clearly irritated. "Or it's just some old team-building retreat at Fort Polk, and she's playing us." You know how some people get with nostalgia? Martha didn't react. Her silence was the kind that unsettled, not passive, not fragile, just unmoved. Another traveler whispered something to his friend. Words like Black Ops and Cold War weren't spoken, but they lingered in the air. The mood shifted again. This wasn't just about policy anymore. It was about identity. Meeks tapped the label on the back of the photo. Langley. "You think that's Langley?" "Virginia, like the CIA." Martha looked at him. Just for a moment. "That's what it used to be called. Back then?" Briggs opened his mouth, then shut it. He didn't like where this was going. Meeks hovered over the final compartment of the duffel. It was tucked beneath a reinforced flap, the kind sewn in with double-stitch threading. Not a cheap bag. Not a careless packer. He gave Briggs a glance, then reached for the zipper. It resisted slightly, the teeth stiff from lack of use. Then it gave. A low rasp echoed across the metal table as he pulled it open. Inside, folded with precise care, was a navy blue jacket. Not wool, not ceremonial. It was tactical, the type used in temperate deployments or training exercises. It had weight. Meeks hesitated. He lifted it slowly, as if unsure whether it should be touched at all. The material was clean, pressed, tightly folded around itself like something that hadn't been disturbed in years. When he unfolded it, a patch slipped into view. Then another. Briggs leaned closer. What is that? The insignia on the chest was standard Air Force. Silver wings and shield, but modified. Below it sat a subdued emblem, an owl in flight over crossed daggers. On the shoulder, there was a subdued American flag. And near the collar, a stitched monogram barely visible against the fabric P-47S. Briggs squinted. What does that even mean? Martha said nothing. She stood quietly, hands still clasped. The jacket bore no rank tabs, no nameplate, no unit stitching. It wasn't a uniform meant to be worn for inspection. This had been operational. Lived in. A seam at the right sleeve had been hand-repaired, carefully restitched with matching thread. Meeks ran his thumb across the patch with the owl. That's not standard. I've never seen that on any tone, not even JSOC. The material was heavier than expected. It was water-resistant but breathable, something you'd wear for long stretches in uncertain conditions. The kind of gear chosen for missions where the lines between combat, intel, and survival blurred. Briggs picked up one of the inner tags and read it aloud. Issued Langley Systems Logistics, Unit Alpha. No date, no serial. Now people in line were fully watching, not trying to hide it. Some had their phones out. One woman whispered the word covert under her breath. Briggs folded the jacket roughly and dropped it back into the bag. The motion broke the moment, but not fully. He glared at Martha. What is this, some costume? She met his eyes without a word. She didn't need to answer. The jacket had already said enough. A man near the back of the line stepped forward just slightly. He looked to be in his 70s, white hair buzzed close, posture still straight in a way that only years of discipline could teach. His eyes narrowed as he focused on the jacket now half folded on the table. That's not a costume, he said quietly. Briggs looked up. Excuse me? The man pointed, not at Martha, but at the patch near the collar. That insignia. I've seen it once. Photo archive at Fort Carson. That owl over the blades. That's not standard issue. That's operational level. Special access. A ripple moved through the crowd. Someone behind him whispered. Another person raised their phone to record. The tension didn't spike all at once. It shifted. Dense. Quiet. Spreading like fog. Martha didn't turn. She just looked at the jacket the way one might look at a photograph of a life. No one else was allowed to know. Footsteps echoed across the marble floor. Crisp. Heavy. Unrushed. From the far side of the atrium, a tall man entered flanked by two uniformed aides. His Class A coat bore 4 stars at the shoulders. His pace was steady, eyes scanning as he approached the checkpoint. Briggs saw him. His posture straightened before he could stop it. General Marshal Crane didn't speak as he neared the table. His gaze shifted from the jacket to the woman standing behind it. His face was unreadable, no emotion, no recognition, just observation. He stopped 2 steps from the table. The entire room had gone silent. Meeks cleared his throat. Sir, this is just routine. Crane raised a hand. Not to silence, just to pause. His eyes settled on the patch, then the missing rank tabs, then the repair thread at the sleeve. He knew exactly what it was. Martha finally looked up. Their eyes met. Neither moved. Crane inhaled once, then exhaled slowly. No words, no reaction. Then he stepped back half a pace and brought his hand to his forehead. The salute was crisp, precise, regulation perfect. Martha responded without hesitation. Her right hand lifted. One motion. Clean. Professional. The atrium held its breath. Briggs lowered his arms. Meeks stared. The crowd barely blinked. The general's voice was even. It's been a long time, Captain. Martha nodded once. 41 years, sir. No one said a word after that. Because no one needed to. General Crane lowered his salute with practiced control. He didn't speak again right away. His eyes remained fixed on the woman in front of him, taking in the details of her stance, her silence, and the uniform now half unfolded on the table. He had seen men freeze under fire with less tension in their bodies than what filled this lobby. Martha Lane dropped her salute without flourish. It ended exactly where it had started. Her hands returned to her sides with a subtle steadiness that no one trained, casually could imitate. She didn't move back, didn't break eye contact, not out of defiance, out of protocol. The pause stretched long enough for a cough from the far end of the line to sound like a gunshot. At 09:27, a bystander near the planter pressed record on her phone. Another already had the angles shifted. The scene became something else entirely, not just a screening, not just a delay, a reckoning. Briggs hadn't moved. His mouth was slightly open, but he didn't seem aware of it. The patch, the salute, the title, Captain. Captain. His voice came out lower than intended, as if the sound got caught halfway up his throat. He looked between the general and Martha, trying to reassert himself but finding nowhere to stand. Captain Lane. Crane turned to him. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. This uniform, officer, who removed it from her bag. Briggs glanced at Meeks, then at the jacket, then at Martha. I did. She refused to answer basic screening questions. Crane's gaze didn't shift. Did she become a threat? There was no answer. Only the kind of stillness that happens when someone realizes they've misread an entire situation. General, sir, Meeks started, his voice a little less certain now. We followed procedure. Her ID was outdated. She gave no official reason for her visit. She didn't need to, Crane replied. Not when her clearance exceeds yours. Meeks blinked. Briggs stepped back. This woman, Crane said, motioning to Martha without fanfare, was part of a task group whose files were sealed under direct order of the National Security Council. Those files were partially declassified last month, which is why I am here, which is why she is here, and which is why, today, the country intends to correct a long-standing oversight. Silence. No one spoke. The crowd had grown, not because anyone had called for attention, but because energy had shifted. It pulled people in, and now, even those who didn't know what they were watching began to feel that they were witnessing something they didn't quite deserve to see. Captain Lane, Crane said, returning to her. It's an honor to see you again. Likewise, sir. He looked to the jacket on the table. I remember when that patch was designed. The owl was your suggestion, wasn't it? Yes, sir. Night-based missions, language and stealth, intelligence as force multiplier. Crane gave the faintest nod. The motto had never been printed. It had only been passed down. Intelligence, not intimidation. Briggs cleared his throat again. But it didn't sound like confidence. It sounded like regret. The general's gaze returned to him. Do you know the minimum requirements for a Distinguished Service Cross officer? Briggs shook his head slowly. Extraordinary heroism in combat. Crane's voice was level. Not survival. Not effort. Heroism. In actual fire conditions. This jacket was earned in places that don't appear on maps. He reached down and lifted it, brushing one corner where a tiny bloodstain had faded to shadow. When did we lose the habit of assuming dignity in others? Briggs had no answer. The general folded the jacket with care and handed it to Martha. She accepted it without a word. The fabric rested over her arms like an extension of memory. The first person to lower their phone did so out of guilt. Then another followed. Respect had returned, but in silence now. Crane turned to the table, took the ID, and slid it into the inner breast pocket of his own uniform. You won't need that again, Captain. You're with me now. Understood, sir. Crane gestured toward the private security gate beyond the checkpoint. A clearance team was waiting, already aware. He gave one last look to the officers and then to the growing crowd. Remember this moment, he said, and remember who you almost missed. Then he and Martha walked together past the checkpoint. No ceremony, no pageantry, just two people moving through a place that had already judged them before it, knew their names. General Crane stepped into the elevator beside Martha, flanked by the aides who had followed him from the lobby. No one spoke on the way up. There was nothing to say that hadn't already been said with a salute. At EO 939, the doors opened to a secure floor near the top of the building. The hall was quiet. Carpeting muted every footstep. At the end of the corridor, behind a closed door, a team from the Department of Defense waited with updated briefings, documents, and protocols. Crane didn't stop there. He turned left into a smaller conference room and gestured for Martha to follow. When the door closed behind them, he let out a slow breath. We've been trying to reach you for months. Martha looked at him. I assumed it would all be handled without me. It shouldn't be. He walked to a side table and poured water into 2 glasses. His hands were steady. He handed one to her. After a pause, he added, They didn't want to unseal the file. You were listed under alternate credentials, buried under level 5 clearance. Half the people reviewing the archive had no idea the file even existed. That was the point, Martha said. He nodded. I know. But after what your team did in 79, it never sat right with some of us. The hostage extraction in Viskov was supposed to be acknowledged. It was promised. She sat down carefully, the folded uniform still resting on her lap. Tell them what they need to know. General, Crane leaned forward, lowering his voice. You were attached to the 7th Special Tactics Squadron under a provisional command directive from JSOC. Your flight records show logged hours in the A-10C Thunderbolt II. Missions filed as NATO air support, but that was a cover. You were flying under Operation Rook, an SAP mission nested under Tier 1 designations. No digital logs. Everything tracked manually and locked under agency crossover agreements. Martha didn't react. She just listened. You coordinated air insertion and evac during the siege. You flew solo into contested airspace at night, with visual nav only. No AWACS, no UAV support. Target was a hostage camp in southern Moravia. The brief was to observe and relay. You made the decision to intervene. She met his eyes for the first time since they entered the room. That wasn't in the plan. You saved 37 people. The Czech government never acknowledged the camp existed. No one ever found the wreckage of the secondary bird. But the flight path was confirmed. Your gun camera footage was reviewed last year during the declassification phase. Martha looked back at the door, then down at the jacket in her lap. You'll be awarded the Distinguished Service Cross. The others too, posthumously. The president's presenting it personally. They've cleared this floor for prep. You'll be introduced as Captain Lane, former Special Tactics Officer attached to Classified Unit Alpha under Operation Rook. Crane waited. She didn't speak right away. Then she nodded once. I didn't do it for the medals. I know, he said. That's why you deserve them. At 10:02 back in the main atrium, the crowd hadn't fully dispersed. Some had moved on, but a cluster still lingered near the checkpoint where it all began. Briggs stood with arms crossed, watching the doors where Martha had exited. His face was hard, but his shoulders had slumped. Meeks hovered nearby, chewing the inside of his cheek. A civilian in line leaned toward Briggs, keeping his voice low. So she really was military. Briggs didn't answer at first, then muttered, "Women weren't allowed in combat roles back then." Not officially. The words carried weight, but not clarity. General Crane had returned briefly to the checkpoint with a stack of sealed folders in hand. He heard the comment as he approached. His eyes didn't narrow. His posture didn't shift, but the air changed. You're correct, officer. Women weren't allowed in direct combat billets during that period. That's why we built structures outside the chain. Briggs raised an eyebrow. Structures. Crane glanced at the checkpoint table where the jacket had been. There were teams formed under joint directives between JSOC and the Central Intelligence Agency, select personnel, linguists, cultural analysts, infiltration specialists were brought in under non-standard contracts. Most of them didn't wear uniforms. Some didn't even carry standard sidearms. He paused, but they trained, harder than most. Because if they failed, there was no backup. Briggs shook his head slightly. So she was, what? A linguist. A support role. She started as a foreign language instructor for field interrogations, fluent in Czech, Serbo-Croatian, German, and Russian, certified through Monterey. Then we ran her through the T6 Texan 2 syllabus with an IP who didn't know why she was even in the seat. She soloed early. No waiver needed. Briggs blinked. She flew. Crane nodded. Logged over 300 hours in A-10C during training ops out of Spangdahlem. Moved into a forward operating assignment as a non-flagged air asset. She flew low-altitude recon FACA support and precision KS into regions we couldn't admit existed at the time. That's not possible, Briggs said, quieter now. You can't just assign someone like that outside the structure. You can, Crane said, if the mission demands it, and if you know how to write the paperwork. Meeks frowned. So you're saying she flew A-10s in Europe before it was even publicly known? We had them stationed there. Crane nodded. Vyskov, 1979. No GPS, no onboard laser. Just a canopy, a pair of Mark 82s, and a Gayu 8 with limited ammo. She went in with visual recon, coordinated ground signals using light bursts and manual comms. No AWACS, no uplink, not even HF. Just time, bearing, and nerves. Briggs looked down. The weight of the words settled in his gut. He had mocked her, searched her, doubted her. Crane closed the folder and tucked it under his arm. Sometimes, the people who stay quiet the longest are the ones who had the least permission to speak. Then he walked away. At 14 Zur in the East Room of the White House, the ceremony began. The room was full, but quiet. Rows of high-ranking officers, agency directors, and White House staff sat in formal uniform and dress attire. Cameras were stationed along the back wall. But the moment did not feel scripted. It felt overdue. Martha Lane stood to the side of the stage. Her jacket was pressed, her posture straight, no ribbons, no flourish, just the insignia she had worn decades before, stitched clean across her shoulder again for the first time in 41 years. The president stepped up to the podium. His tone was measured, no theatrics. Today, we honor a woman who served this country not just with skill, but with silence. A pilot. An intelligence operator, a rescuer, and, until recently, an invisible figure in our own story. He paused, then continued. In 1979, during the height of tensions in Eastern Europe, American assets learned of a black site prison camp holding civilian and military hostages. The details of that operation were sealed. Today, they are not. Captain Martha Lane flew into contested airspace in a lone A-10 unescorted, using visual navigation and manual radio codes. She made that decision with no command authorization, because the situation demanded it. The screen behind him showed a map of Moravia with a faint marker near Vyskov. The slide changed, a blurred aerial image. Then a still from declassified cockpit footage, smoke, structures, a landing zone scorched at the perimeter. She coordinated ground teams, provided suppressive fire using the GAU-8, and dropped ordnance within 70 meters of civilian hostages. Knowing any deviation would result in failure, he looked to her, then back to the audience. 37 lives were recovered, including foreign nationals. One of them, today, is seated in this room. The camera shifted briefly. A woman in her 60s nodded slowly, tears visible, though she didn't speak. For this, and for years of unrecognized service under conditions that denied her rank, recognition, or even mention. Today, the Department of Defense awards Captain Lane the Distinguished Service Cross. The president stepped down and approached her. Crane stood behind, holding the case. The medal was pinned carefully, just above her heart. Her expression didn't shift. She did not cry. She did not smile. She stood as she always had. Solid, quiet, present. The room rose to its feet. Some clapped. Others stood silently. She looked toward the flag, then to Crane. Then she nodded once. It was enough. At 15:11, after the ceremony had cleared and the formal photos were done, Martha stepped out through a quiet corridor leading away from the East Room. The cameras were gone now. The aides had turned their attention elsewhere. The world had moved on to other names and other causes. But just beyond the south veranda, in the courtyard reserved for private guests, 4 chairs sat in a shaded circle. No flags, no markers, just presence. The first to rise was Nolan Price. He moved with a cane now, left leg stiff from a parachute malfunction outside Split in 1982. His eyes hadn't changed. The sharpness, the memory. He gave Martha a single nod, and she returned it. Next was Isabel Chen. Back then, she had run signals for joint ops in Prague, never carried a weapon, but knew how to drop a relay node through a sewer grate without being seen. She stepped forward and took Martha's hand, holding it longer than necessary. Neither of them spoke. Across the grass, near a worn bench, Henry Toller sat watching. He hadn't worn the uniform since '85, still kept the haircut, still wore the watch issued to him at Hurlburt Field. When he stood, his shoulders squared without effort. He walked toward Martha without a word and placed a folded paper in her hand. Inside, a black and white photo. The whole team, all of them, standing next to the Huey they had nicknamed Low Tide. She ran her fingers along the edge of the photo, careful not to crease it. Behind them, standing quietly beneath a magnolia tree, was the last Rave. No first name, no records beyond a shredded personnel file recovered from a fire in '87. He had been their eyes on the ground in every place maps didn't mark. He walked up, placed his palm to his chest, and nodded once. That was all. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. There are some things that aren't meant for retelling. Not out of secrecy, out of weight. They sat together for 20 minutes, watered from a shared pitcher, watched the flag sway with the late July breeze, talked of nothing in particular, names that only meant something to them, call signs long deactivated. One of them mentioned the old airstrip outside Plovdiv. Someone laughed, not loudly, just enough to pull the moment closer. When it was time to go, they stood as one. No hugs, no ceremony. Martha placed the photo in her jacket pocket. Toller glanced back once and said, "Just glad we got to see you get your name back." She answered with a simple, "Me too." Then they parted again, quietly, as they always had. At 16:12, most of the guests had cleared out. The formal reception was done. The courtyard had emptied. Only a few aides remained near the security perimeter. Martha stood near a hedge, watching the flag lower for evening colors. Her uniform jacket was still on, sleeves neat, collar aligned. She didn't move when someone approached from behind. "Ma'am." The voice was younger, measured. Officer Ellis stepped into view. Late 20s, duty blues, Second Lieutenant Barr catching a hint of fading sun. She looked uncertain. I needed to say something. I should have said something back at the checkpoint. I saw what was happening and I'm sorry." Martha didn't turn right away. She waited for the quiet to settle, then spoke gently. "And what would you have said?" Ellis paused. "I don't know. Just That it didn't look right. Martha nodded. That would have been enough. Ellis looked down. I kept thinking about the chain of command. Procedure. Authority. I didn't want to step out of line. You were in line, Martha said. You just didn't know where you stood in it yet. Ellis shifted her weight. Her boots were polished, her cap tucked under her arm. I thought you were just an old woman. No ID. Quiet. I didn't see it. You weren't supposed to, Martha replied. I was trained to be unseen. Ellis met her gaze. And now, it doesn't matter who sees. I'm not doing this for visibility. Ellis took a breath. I think what scares me is not knowing if I'll ever be that strong. To stand there, calm, right when everyone else doubts you. You'll get there. Strength isn't about who hears you. It's about what you carry, even when no one helps. Ellis stepped a little closer. I guess I thought medals were about being seen. Recognition. Martha smiled faintly. Recognition isn't the reward. The work is. Ellis looked back at the building. I joined to serve, but I'm still figuring out what that really means. It means showing up when it's hard, when it's quiet, when the cameras are gone. It means trusting that value doesn't come from applause. They stood in silence for a long moment. Wind moved across the courtyard, brushing against the flags, the glass, the stone. Ellis finally said, I hope I can carry it like you did. Martha looked out toward the horizon, where the light was already starting to fade. Don't carry it like I did. Carry it the way you were meant to. You'll know how. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't shake hands. She just placed a hand lightly on the younger woman's shoulder. A simple touch. Steady. Then she walked away. Into the evening. The weight she bore still invisible, but never lessened. At 1842, the sun had dipped low over the Potomac. Light filtered through the trees along Constitution Avenue, amber and fading. Martha walked alone. No escort. No security detail. Just the quiet shuffle of soft-soled shoes along the sidewalk. Her uniform jacket was now folded neatly over one arm. Medal tucked away. No longer displayed. A reporter had tried to follow earlier. She declined the interview with a glance. A few tourists stared, unsure of what they recognized. She kept walking. At the base of the Capitol steps, someone called out, Ma'am, wait. It was Ellis, half jogging to catch up, still in full dress uniform. Hair slightly undone now. The kind of disarray that happens when the day has been longer than expected. Martha slowed, but she didn't stop. I know it's probably not my place, Ellis said, reaching her. There's more I wanted to ask. About the mission. About who you were back then. Martha kept her pace steady. Some things belong to those who lived them. Ellis nodded. She didn't argue. Martha glanced sideways. Her expression was calm. They're not secrets. They're just not for display. The sidewalk curved along the reflecting pool. The crowd had thinned. Streetlights hummed softly, flickering on one by one. Do you mind if I walk with you? Martha paused, then gave a slight nod. Not a yes. Not a no. Just a shared silence. They walked. No questions followed. No storytelling. Only the sound of passing buses, a distant helicopter overhead, and the muted rustle of early evening. Ellis eventually spoke, but her voice was soft. My mom served logistics, nothing classified. She used to tell me, some stories aren't yours to own, even if they shaped you. Martha didn't answer right away. Then, with a small smile, your mother's a smart woman. They reached a bench near the river's edge. Martha stopped there, looked out at the water. Sometimes, you don't need to explain a thing. You just have to keep showing up. Ellis stood beside her, unsure whether to sit, unsure whether to speak again. Then she simply said, Thank you for letting me walk this far. Martha gave her a look. It was quiet, weightless, but not empty. You walked yourself here. No ceremony followed, no music swelled, just footsteps and sky. They turned toward the next streetlight, and the frame held on the path behind them, then faded to black.